Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we are going to learn how to create a color map in various ways using Autodesk Maya, and we'll also look into exporting maps and using other third-party programs like Substance Painter and Adobe Photoshop, and maybe even hop into Mudbox a little bit if our model seems to work in Mudbox. So we'll have to play around with that a little bit. Let's get let's get started here. And I went ahead and provided you guys with a shield model. And this shield model, if I hit the 3 key on my keyboard, you can see works well in smooth mesh mode. So we have a pretty decent shell to work with. I've also gone ahead and laid out these UVs for you where there's nothing overlapped, and it's actually a very clean UV map. So to get a color map to work properly, you're going to need to have a very clean UV map to start. So that's very important. So this is after your UV process. So let's look at this model and let's kind of break it down into the different pieces. We have the handle, we have the center of the shield, and we have the large disc part of the shield, which all of which we can use. Now in my UV editor, I've broken these down slightly further. I've broken these down into the center of the shield, the back of the shield, the yellow part that you see here, the center of the large disc, and then the rim of the large disc, and that's very important. I've also broken down the front of the back handle as well as the inside faces of the back handle as well. So that gives us a pretty good starting point. It also shows how you can visually break things down in multiple ways in Autodesk, and it really kind of helps with that. All right, so let's get started to the fun stuff. Let's see different ways that we can create color maps. So one of the first things I like to do to create a standard color map is I like to go ahead and just export my UV snapshot. So in the UV editor, let me go ahead and rescale this so you all can see. I want to contain everything in my model in the upper left-hand corner. So if I grab every separate piece, now notice I did not combine anything in my model, and they're all in this upper right-hand quadrant, right-hand quadrant. We're going to go ahead and export these. So it's pretty easy. We're going to go to the words polygons. We're going to go to UV snapshot. We're going to go ahead and set our directory where these will go. In our case, we'll just throw them on the desktop and say UV layout. I've already tested to make sure I don't have any distortion, so go ahead and watch the UV layout if you're still confused about UVs and layouts. And I'm going to go ahead on my desktop and hit save. And I went ahead and made these 2K textures, so 2048 by 2048. That should give us plenty of space to paint in. And if everything's selected, and I've changed my image format from IF to maybe a JPEG, something easier to open, I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And what that did is it saved a file called uvlayout.jpg. So now we can, let me shut down all these windows, we can take a look at this. So if I double click, you can see I basically have a coloring book page to color in my file. So let's go ahead and do some rough color work. I'm going to go ahead and open my file in Adobe Photoshop. I like to start with Photoshop. It's the quickest kind of way to get the look that I'm going for. So give this a few seconds to open up. Let it load here. And we'll do File, Open, and we'll grab, that was on our desktop, our UV layout. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and first I'm going to break these down into different shapes. So I think I'm going to start by actually coloring in or dropping an overall shader using the Marquee tool. I'm going to drop a color on the center shield. It's pretty circular, so it gives me a good way to kind of isolate it. I'm going to do it, and I'm going to type center base. And I always usually start with my base colors. So for this center base, let's do just a brown. We'll do solid colors here. And I'm going to go ahead and fill that using, oops, I double clicked there by accident, using Alt-Delete or Control-Delete, depending on what you have. You also have your color swatchability, so maybe I'm going to fill that just a little bit darker. And let's move it toward the dark spectrum here. Perfect. All right. So now I have that color filled. Now what you can see is it's in between, you know, I kind of painted outside my lines, and that's okay. But that will give me a good starting point. So now that I have that, we could even open up our swatches and play around with this. I'm going to do a new layer, and we'll call this back of shield. So we'll call it back base, and I will put my dot in the center. I will stretch my marquee over. If you get into the other one, guess what? You have an eraser tool, so it does not need to be perfect. And on the back base, let's go ahead and let's make this even darker. So let's try to find let's go to the color swatch, almost a black brown. There we go. So we'll put that in. And you can see I've kind of have areas where it's bleeding over. I could use my move tool, hit V on my keyboard, and kind of nudge this into place if need be. My double click is very sensitive today. And I can go up and down. I'm basically hitting my arrow keys on my keyboard until I hit that. And if I can't, I can hit Command T and kind of stretch it just slightly. If that doesn't work, get your good old paintbrush and, you know, paint some areas in where you see fit. All right, now that I have that, let's go ahead and continue to add. I like this color. I want it to be the same color as I have on the base up here. So I'm going to go ahead and do rim base. That's the rim of the shield that we were talking about. And I'm going to, this one's a little tricky because I'm going to cut a hole and then I'm going to subtract this center part. So I'm going to hold my Alt key in Photoshop and I'm going to draw a subtraction so you can see that real quick. So again, holding your Alt key, and I'm also holding my Control and Shift keys to kind of get that to expand. And if it doesn't work, I just want to try to not get that area on the inside out. That's okay. We can also do it the old school way. So let's step backward real quick. And let's draw a marquee, and we'll do it the old school way. There we go. So we're going to fill this. My computer would snap into place here. There we go. Now, if snapping's turned on, you can go ahead and turn your snap off. That's going to help under the view, and that will also help you not snap to things. I already have my other one loaded, so I'm going to fill that. Now, it hid my other area. So now I want to make sure I kind of eyeball that off for now. I'm going to get a square marquee here real quick, and this is going to be my handle, and my handle is going to be silver. So I'm going to pick a grayish tone, and I'm going to say handle, and we'll put both the handles on here. So we'll fill this with the color that we're looking for, and you can see now they kind of overlap, so you don't have to worry too much about that handle having too much black on it. And we'll stretch this out slightly to cover the whole area. Excuse me. If this doesn't fit, I can always drag my layers around too. So I'll go back to the handle and I will go ahead and fill this one with gray as well. And we'll do Alt backspace, maybe do a Command T here. Actually, in this case, let's use the eraser, E for eraser. So I can just gently, let me get something nice and soft. There we go. Use my bracket keys next to the P key. And we don't want to reveal the edges, so we just basically want to hide. Now, another way to do this is drag that center base all the way to the top, and it will just overlap it. All right, now we have the center part of the shield. I'm thinking we want this to be gold, so I'm going to go ahead and start in the center, hold Alt and Shift, and draw a circle. That looks pretty good. I got that on the money. And we're going to call this center, whoops, double click and say center shield. Just put SH. And we're going to go ahead and find a yellow, maybe a golden color. I already have some swatches, so I can even use like a UCF gold. And I'll go ahead and hit Alt Delete to put that in there. And now we have our base colors. Now, if we want to test these, there's a cool trick. What you can do is you can duplicate your background of your UV map and move it to the very top and cover everything. And then set that layer to an overlay or a screen, and you can kind of see if everything's housed within the lines. And it looks like everything's pretty good on my end. I don't have too much touching up to do, so I can kind of turn that off. What I'll also do is grab all of these, and I'll create a new group, and I'll call this group Base Colors, because we're not adding texture yet, we're just adding colors. And I'm going to save this PSD as color, or we'll say working shield color map. We'll make sure this is a multi-layered PSD because we want to come back and change it, and we will save it. We will also save this as a JPEG so we can test it in Maya. So we're going to go to output shield color map, and this is going to be our test in Maya. So let's go back into Maya, open up our file, and let's apply a shader. So I'm going to apply a blend shader, favorite material blend, and next to the word color I'm going to hit the checkerboard. I'm going to get the create render node button, and I'm going to click file. We're going to hit this, and we're going to go to desktop, and we should see our shield color map. We don't want to put the PSD, but we want to put the JPEG in. And when we put that in, I like to also turn off quadratic filter. Filter type essentially is just a subtle blurring that Maya does to your textures. So you want to kind of sometimes not see any blurring unless you're going to put it on. And what you can see right away is we don't see our texture. So if we hit 6 on our keyboard, you'll see there the texture is. But in this shield, it doesn't match up. So why is it not matching up? Well, let's look. If we look at our UV map, we can see everything's in the place. But this specific model has multiple UV channels on it. Now, I did this on purpose because I want you to see that, you know, sometimes you hit buttons, and I was testing some UV maps out, and sometimes I hit some buttons that change it. So I'm going to go ahead and hit delete on that UV map. And now, let's make sure everything has this blend. We'll do that, and now everything shows up pretty good. Now I inspect my model. I can see I have a few of those seams popping out, those little outlines on the top, so I'm going to want to change that. And overall, I really like the basic color layout. So let's go back to Photoshop and make those adjustments. The seams are here, so if I get my brush, and real quick, I accidentally rotated my canvas, sorry about that. I'm going to get my B tool for brush. I'm going to go and get a soft brush, make sure everything's at 100%. If I hold my Alt key down, I'm just going to paint over areas. I'm going to sample the colors around them. And when you do that, you want to make sure actually you're on the layer that you're covering up. So this looks pretty good. It looks like I got it. This one may need some work. So that was the center base. And there we go. Not too bad. It can be a little messy at a certain point, but pretty good. So let's go ahead and save that working file out. Let's go ahead and revamp the output color. So we'll save over that, hit OK, go back to Maya. And we're going to simply hit reload, and you can see it took away some of our little errors. So I still have a few in there. I'm going to have to figure out where these are. One quick way to do that is to grab the edge in question. You can see those are on an edge. And if I zoom in, I can see they're actually way up here, which is kind of interesting that they would be all the way on the top. And I can kind of go and fix those. So in Photoshop, they're most likely somewhere up here. It may just be a minor graphical glitch. So that's your base color. The next step really is to start adding shading and texture. Now, we can add shading a bunch of different ways. I have a baking light video. I have a baking occlusion video. I have a starting point for that. That will help. I can even go ahead and add it myself. So, for instance, if I want this center area kind of shaded, so the inside kind of area around the base, what I can actually do is I can actually use my layer styles in Photoshop. So if I apply a layer style, for instance, and I do an inner shadow, and let's go ahead and raise let's actually make it 90 degrees. Let's raise the size and the choke there. We'll pull down our noise a little bit. And let's hit OK so we can see it without. We can start creating shading using layer effects here in Maya. So if you're not the best visual artist, but you really want to get like that kind of soft contoured look, we can absolutely use this to our advantage. And let's go ahead and let's make this black just so we can get it to work. And let's soften this distance in the middle. Perfect. And there we go. So we can start getting that shading. There's other things like satin, for instance. That's a cool one. We can add a pattern. For instance, if we wanted to overlay a specific pattern here, which we really don't want to do on our shield, but we could go ahead and do that if we see fit. We can add all sorts of cool things. We could add a bevel, we could add a drop shadow, a stroke even, if we really wanted to go that far. All sorts of cool stuff. So we're going to hit OK, and we're going to save this out, and we're going to do, well, we'll save over working shield, and we'll do another quick save, and we'll make this a JPEG, and we're going to do OK, and we're going to reload this, and you can see now we're getting some shading in there. It's very subtle, but it's there. So what I could also do, because I know there's areas on the inside, is I could actually also turn this back on. I could come in with another brush and maybe reset my palette and maybe put my brush down to a real low opacity. And I could set this layer to multiply, and with a real soft brush, I could go in and I could kind of work on some shading here. So even, again, if you have a tablet, it's actually really nice, and it will give you a steady look, but I'm doing this really sloppily. Okay, I'm gonna even run a filter because it's not as blurry as I'd hoped for. There we go. Perfect. And now I have a little shading on the middle. So again, let's save that out. Let's do a JPEG. Let's go to Color Shield Output. Let's replace it. Let's hit OK. Let's save our PSD. Save that again. And go into here, and let's see what that result gets us. Let's hit reload. Now we have a little bit of shading on the outside of the center piece. So you can see that I actually put the shading in. So that's really the process of color mapping. You just continue to add and continue to shade until you get the result that really you're looking for in your final piece. And you can always reload your file. Now, what happens if we don't want to use Maya? What if we want to use a program like Substance? Well, Substance Painter and 3D Coat are just secondary programs out there to help you texture your model better. So what we would need to do is, for this program, we would need to export our model as an FBX. So I'm going to go ahead and say Export Selection. I'm going to make sure I find FBX Export, and I'll go put it on my desktop, and I'll call it Shield. And I'll go ahead and export that complete selection, and make sure you're grabbing everything. And at this point, that is exported. We don't need Photoshop anymore. And one thing I don't do is I don't need the UV layout, because what you're going to find out, and let me put some of these over here on this side of the screen, is we're not going to need them. We only need the model information. So let's go ahead and find Substance. Substance is free for a year. It's actually a great texturing program. I highly recommend it to everyone. And we're going to open up Substance, and we're going to allow access. Yours may not say that. And we don't want to download a new version right at the moment, because we want to hop in and get started. So here's Substance Painter. You're going to actually find it's pretty cool with its results. Now, before we were looking at our model in Maya, and Maya is not a physical-based renderer. What you're seeing right now is no lighting, and there's really not a lot going on. It's kind of simulated. The Substance Painter will actually create a tool that really focuses more on real life materials. So to start, we're going to go ahead and hit a new file, and we're going to go ahead and open up a PBR, or a physical based rendering element, and I like to do metallic and roughness. I usually do high quality. Specular and glossiness is good too. It's really up to you. We'll keep it default. For me, it was specular and glossiness. You can even see there's ones for Unity, so that's really nice. So you can kind of have one for Unity. Let's go ahead and stick with that and see what happens. We'll do 2048, and we'll go ahead and select a model, and guess what that model is? That's our Shield FBX. We're going to hit OK, and we're going to bring it in. And now if I hold Alt, just like in Maya, what you can see is I actually have my shield. And not only do I have my shield, but I have all of my tools. So let's, for instance, say I just start painting. It will paint on my 3D model. Or if I use my undo, it will undo. If I use my bracket keys, it will give me a bigger area. And the cool part about Substance is what we can do is we can lay the base colors. We can bake things. We can do all sorts of stuff. So here's what I start with. I start with finding the texture settings, and I find the button that says Bake Textures. And in here, I go ahead and uncheck most things. But one of the two things I keep open are my ambient occlusion and my curvature. And I go ahead and hit Bake Textures in those, and you'll see it's going to bake out an ambient occlusion map for me. And there we go. You can see it shaded some areas already, which is really, really nice. That helps. And now we can get started. So let's look at some of the materials and such that we have access to in here. So we have our shelf. So let's go to materials. And let's go ahead and just drag on materials. Now, how do we do this? Well, if I drag it up into the layers panel, everything turns gold. So how do I really mask out where I want to drag? Well, just like Photoshop, Substance has masks as well. So let me show you. So we'll do a gold shader. Everything's going to turn gold. We can delete this one right here. And what other shaders do we want? Maybe a wood shader. And you can see they're kind of mixing with one another. It depends where I put them, but they kind of mix. And maybe we want, we're going to want some sort of shiny iron look, right? So we're going to put that in there too. Now, we don't want them to mix with each other, so I'm going to right-click on each one and add a black mask, which will just hide that material. So once I add a black mask, here's where the really, really, really cool part comes in. You ready for this? In your mask, we can actually isolate specific areas. So there's a tool up on your toolbar, and you'll see it's this little square. It's called Polygon Fill. When I click it, it allows me to select certain areas, and it brings up this little fill mode. And so if I want to select, and you can see my slider here, if I want to fully fill this with the color, I can now click on my mask and just tap the faces where I want this to be. Now I also have a UV shell mode, which will put the whole UV shell. So I can go to each mask and I can say, okay, I want the back of this to be wood, I want the rim of this to be wood, I want the centerpiece, I want that to be something else, so we're going to add another piece. I want this to be that ironish shader. So it's very small, we have to be careful with that, but there we go. Now it's in there, and let's turn it and look. Absolutely, we got the nice wooden texture, we can edit that. What do we want the center to be? Maybe we will do a, I don't know, we don't want to make it too bad. Kind of go through, and you can even download extra shaders. It's really nice. We even have smart materials that kind of come with masks, so you can kind of go through, and I can draw like a wood walnut on that, and we'll do that for sure. That one looks really, really slick. We'll add a black mask, we'll click on our mask, go to this little tool at the top, the Polygon Fill, and select UV, and then click on that. And now look at the difference in our textures. So we're really done with this as of now, right? But look at the starting point that we can get. It's much more intense. So again, what we can do now is click on these individual shaders, and for instance, if I want that wood color to be slightly darker, I can change that, right? I can change the specular highlights of that wood color, so I can play with the roughness and metalness of it. I can turn on different things to make it shinier, and I can start painting. So we're not going to get too far into substance, but at this point, if I'm ready to go, what I can do is simply right-click, and this isn't done yet. We want to add a lot more, but I can right-click and say Export Textures, and I can actually export it for Unity, and it will bring in all the maps I created. So if I hit export here, give it a few seconds, we'll open folder, and here we go. Let me double click on these so you guys can see these. Now I have my maps. So you can see there's some distortion. That's just how it fills in the blanks. If you want to get rid of that distortion, what you can actually do is on your export, you can go ahead and when you go ahead and kind of take out the padding, you can just take it to transparent, or you can say no padding. You can do all sorts of stuff. That's with your padding though. I don't really mind it because now I have the ability to take that folder. So again, export textures. It goes to Substance Painter, export. Open that folder. And I can open these back up into Photoshop now. And I have a specular map that keeps the specularity. I have a normal map that I can plug in. Now, one of the things, these won't look great in Maya. These will look great in Unity. But you can see it's definitely a quicker means to an end to get started. And then what I can really do is start grouping these off, for instance, and I can put new layers and things like that above them. I don't know if you guys noticed, but I have a whole slew of brushes here, and I could go ahead and mess with these brushes. And for instance, I can only maybe paint the color, and let's do that brush, and let's get a really, really chalky one. And let's change the color to almost a dark color. I don't know why we would paint fibers, but you know, whatever, more power to it. And we can kind of play with all the flow and the brush size and the stroke opacity, so we can make it really small. And we can kind of go in there and start painting. And I don't know if you guys can see it. I'm trying to make it not look so terrible, but there it is. There it's coming in. So I could add some, you know, some damage. I could even go and add that on the different materials. I can even paint up in here if I really wanted to. Let's say I just want to add some metal look. So if I pull this up and I paint here, I can add it just to the metallic map. So again, that will add it to the specularity, or in this case, it could take away specularity in certain points. You can see that's not as shiny anymore. Or if I paint in black here, I can kind of take away some areas, which is kind of really cool for it. And if I put this above this layer, you can now see, here we go, this is a great example, how I can add specularity. Or take away from specularity in certain areas. And we have all these brushes. I mean, we got spots, we can do all sorts of really cool things with these. And we can continue to just add our layers in, use our bracket keys, kind of like Photoshop, and really just get some really cool effects going on in the final product. So that's Substance Painter for you. So that's a really cool one too. And when we save this, we would just save it as a substance file, but our ultimate goal is to get those bitmap textures out of it. I think that's kind of where we'll end today. That gives you a good idea of what's out there. Everything from creating color maps in Photoshop to kind of pushing them further in Substance Painter. Now, one of the things that we will do in other lessons, we will absolutely continue to push the color mapping and adding detail and adding texture and bump and normalness. But this is just a good way to get you to figure out how to put your color map on your file.